The Sunday morning light is a physical assault, stabbing me through the blinds and illuminating a million tiny dust motes dancing in the graveyard of last night's party. The whole apartment smells like a brewery's dumpster, stale beer, sour wine, and the ghost of a forgotten plate of buffalo wings. Confetti is glued to the floor with something sticky, and a single sad paper crown is lying face down in a puddle of what I hope is melted ice. I'm sitting in the middle of it all, a queen on a throne of garbage. My phone feels like a dead weight in my hand. I've been staring at it for hours, my thumb moving with a life of its own, swiping, closing, reopening the same app. WhatsApp Nathan's name. His profile picture, a goofy selfie of us on a hike, is gone. In its place is that sterile, gray, anonymous silhouette. It's like he's been erased. My last message, a pathetically casual "Are we going to talk about this?" sent at 3 a.m., sits there with a single damning gray checkmark. Not delivered, it's a clean cut. He didn't just turn his phone off, he blocked me. Everywhere. Instagram, Facebook, even my number, and a hot, bitter wave of fury washes over the hangover. He just walked out. Over a stupid letter, over a joke. I keep replaying it, trying to pinpoint the exact moment it became this apocalypse. All I can see is everyone's faces laughing. Amelia was practically crying with laughter. It was a good bit. For the first time in months, I felt like I was actually in the circle, not just orbiting it. And he throws it all away because he can't take a little ribbing. Jesus, Amelia calls her fiancé a sentient potato to his face at least twice a week. It's how we talk. It's our language. He's always been too sensitive, too earnest for this group. He's acting like I took a knife to him when all I did was read a few silly, over-the-top lines out loud. He's making a goddamn mountain out of a molehill, and I'm the one left sitting in the wreckage. He has no right to just disappear. He has no right to make me the villain in a story where he was the one who couldn't handle the punchline. We've been together for 3 years. Nathan isn't the kind of man you write poems about. He's the kind of man who quietly fixes the leaky faucet you've been complaining about for 6 months without being asked. He's a soil scientist. His hands, no matter how hard he scrubs them, always have a faint line of earth under the nails. He smells like rain and clean dirt. He's quiet, methodical, and his idea of a thrilling conversation is explaining the complex symbiotic relationship between fungi and tree roots. He spoke about mycelial networks the way other people talk about blockbuster movies, with a hushed, genuine reverence. His love wasn't in grand declarations. It was in the small, steady things. Remembering the obscure brand of herbal tea I liked, leaving a perfectly ripe avocado on the counter for my breakfast, the way he'd trace the lines on my palm when we watched TV. He was real, solid. My world is the exact opposite. I work in PR where reality is a negotiable concept. My life is a curated feed of clever captions and strategic lighting. My friends, especially my work wife Amelia, are the architects of this world. Amelia is the sun my social circle orbits around. She's beautiful, viciously funny, and can dismantle a person's entire self-worth with a single, perfectly timed, smiling observation. Our group's currency is irony, sincerity is cringe, vulnerability is a weakness to be exploited for a good laugh. We don't hug, we trade razor-sharp insults as a sign of affection. To be earnest is to be boring, and to be boring is the ultimate sin. When I was alone with Nathan, the world was quiet and real. I could breathe, he was my anchor. But when I brought him to one of Amelia's parties, that anchor felt like it was dragging me to the bottom of the ocean. He'd stand in the corner, holding a beer, looking completely lost as the performative banter flew around him like shrapnel. Someone would ask him what he did for a living. He'd try to explain, his face lighting up with genuine passion, and Amelia would quip, "So, you play in the dirt for a living." How very rustic. Everyone would laugh, a quick, sharp bark of amusement. Nathan wouldn't get the joke, but he'd feel the sting. He'd just nod, smile weakly, and retreat further into himself. And I would feel this hot, shameful flush of embarrassment. I loved him, I swear I did, but in those moments, seeing him through their eyes, he looked simple, unpolished. He didn't have the right comebacks, he didn't understand the layers of irony. He was a folk song in a room full of electronic dance music. I started to see his best qualities, his sincerity, his steadiness, his lack of pretense, as social liabilities. My liabilities? I felt this constant, gnawing pressure to prove that I wasn't like him, that I was one of them. Sharp, witty, and definitely not the kind of girl who would fall for a man who gets excited about soil pH levels. I had to prove I could play the game. Our third anniversary was last week. He'd been acting weirdly secretive for about a month, constantly hunched over his laptop at odd hours, quickly minimizing the screen whenever I walked into the room. A small, private smile would linger on his lips. I teased him about it, guessing he was planning some elaborate surprise trip to a national park or researching a rare type of moss he wanted to show me. Instead, on the morning of our anniversary, he simply handed me a thick cream-colored envelope, his hand shaking almost imperceptibly. Inside were 5 pages, front and back, covered in his neat, almost architectural handwriting. It was a letter. Nathan doesn't do words, not the emotional kind. He texts in bullet points: need milk, running 10 min late, good luck with presentation. He communicates in shared articles about carbon sequestration and documentaries about regenerative farming. For him to write a 5 page letter was the emotional equivalent of another man climbing Mount Everest. And as I read it, it completely floored me. It was the most beautiful, vulnerable thing anyone had ever given me. He wrote about the first time he saw me at a friend's barbecue, how my laugh had cut through the noise and made him forget the awkward small talk he was trapped in. He wrote about how he felt safe with me, how the constant, low-level anxiety he carried with him just seemed to quiet down when I was around. And then, on the 3rd page, he told me something he'd never spoken about, not in 3 years. He wrote about his childhood stutter, a severe, debilitating one that had made him the primary target for a group of relentless bullies for most of elementary school. He described the hot, prickling shame of not being able to say his own name during roll call, the way the other kids would contort their faces to mimic him, the years he spent in terrified silence because it was easier than the humiliation of speaking. He wrote, and I remember the exact words because they're burned into my brain like a brand: being with you is like learning to speak all over again, but without the fear. You are the only person in the world who has ever made my own voice feel like a safe place. It was more than a confession, it was the key to understanding him. It was the origin story for his quietness, his aversion to conflict, his deep-seated gentleness. He was handing me the broken, most vulnerable part of himself and trusting me to hold it. I wept not just little tears, but big, gulping sobs. I held him and told him I loved him more than anything, that he was the best man I'd ever known, and I meant it. And then, like an absolute world-class fool, I folded the letter neatly and tucked it into the side pocket of my purse. The party was Amelia's idea, a joint celebration for her recent promotion and a belated nod to our anniversary. A power couple thing, she'd called it. I knew I shouldn't have brought the letter. A voice, small and sane, screamed at me to leave it on the nightstand where it belonged. But a louder, sicker, more vain part of me wanted to show it off, not the part about the stutter, of course. God, no, just the romance of it. I had this pathetic little fantasy of casually mentioning it, letting the girls fawn over how sweet and unexpectedly deep Nathan was. It was a prop. A piece of evidence to prove that my quiet, dirt-loving boyfriend was secretly a poet, that I had a depth they couldn't see. The night went on, wine flowed like water, and the atmosphere got louder, sharper. The ritual began, the ceremonial roasting of the partners. It was a sport, and Amelia was an Olympic champion. She did a 10-minute routine about her fiancé's obsession with his Peloton bike that was both hilarious and surgically cruel. Everyone was roaring, then the spotlight swung to me, all eyes on me. Amelia smirked, swirling her Merlot. All right, Jen, your turn. Tell us something embarrassing about the professor of dirt. Does he name his favorite rocks? Does he whisper sweet nothings to his compost pile? The room filled with laughter. And in that moment, fueled by 4 glasses of Chardonnay and a desperate, pathetic need to impress these people who I didn't even truly like, I felt a switch flip in my brain. The sane voice was drowned out by the clamor for approval. My hand went to my purse. I could feel the crisp, dangerous edges of the envelope, and I made a decision. A terrible, life-altering decision. I smiled, a wide, bright performer's smile. Oh, it's much better than that, I said, pulling out the letter. He's a writer. The room went quiet for a beat, a collective, intrigued inhale. I had them. I unfolded the pages, my hands feeling steady despite the wine buzzing in my veins. He wrote me a letter for our anniversary, I announced, beaming as if I were presenting a national treasure. I started reading. At first, I stuck to the safe parts, the sweet, romantic lines about my laugh and the way my hair catches the light. There were a few appreciative ahs from the girls. But that wasn't the reaction I wanted. It was too sincere, too boring. I needed laughter. I needed the sharp, explosive validation of a punchline well delivered, so I skipped to page 3. Okay, get this, I said, leaning into it, adopting the conspiratorial tone of a stand-up comedian. My big, strong man has a secret. I found the paragraph about his stutter. And I read it aloud, but I didn't just read it, I performed it. I exaggerated the heartfelt words, twisting their sincerity into something awkward and funny. When I got to the part about him being unable to say his own name, I feigned a dramatic, theatrical stammer. NNN Nathan, I mimicked, my voice high and cartoonish. The first laugh was a nervous titter, but then Amelia let out a full-throated shriek of laughter, slapping her knee, and it was like a dam breaking. The whole room erupted. People were howling, wiping tears from their eyes. They weren't just laughing, they were feeding on it, and I was feeding on them. Their applause was a drug, every laugh was a hit of pure, unadulterated acceptance. I didn't look at Nathan, I didn't want to. I kept my eyes locked on Amelia, on the laughing faces, on the glittering approval in their eyes. I was so focused on my audience that the subject of my little comedy routine ceased to be a real person. He was just material. I read the final, devastating line, "You are the only person in the world who has ever made my own voice feel like a safe place." With a flourish, my voice dripping with mock sentimentality. I finished, looked up at the cheering crowd, and took a little bow. The applause was deafening. And in the sudden quiet as it died down, I finally let myself look for him. He was standing by the doorway where he'd been all along. He wasn't angry. He wasn't shouting. There were no tears. His face was just blank, utterly, terrifyingly blank. The color had drained from his skin, leaving him pale and waxen under the warm party lights. He was looking at me, but his eyes seemed to be looking right through me, as if he was seeing a ghost. It was a look of such profound, bottomless disappointment that it physically knocked the air out of my lungs. The triumphant buzz of the wine vanished, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. He didn't say a word, he just held my gaze for a long, silent moment. Then he calmly put down his half-full beer bottle on a side table, turned, grabbed his jacket from the hook, and walked out the door, closing it softly behind him. The click of the latch was the loudest sound in the world. The party ended not long after that. Nathan's silent exit had sucked the air out of the room, leaving behind an awkward, fizzled-out energy. I tried to laugh it off, making a joke about him being a party pooper, but no one joined in. They just offered tight, sympathetic smiles and started making their excuses to leave. By the time I stumbled back to our apartment, drunk and defiant, I was convinced he was just being dramatic. I expected to find him sitting on the couch, ready for a fight. I was already rehearsing my lines, how he was being too sensitive, how he needed to learn to take a joke, how he'd embarrassed me by storming out. But the apartment was quiet. And dark, at first, I didn't notice. I kicked off my heels and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. It was when I went into the bedroom that the cold dread from the party came rushing back 10 times stronger. His side of the closet was empty, hangers were bare. His worn-out hiking boots were gone from their spot by the door. I ran to the bathroom. His toothbrush, his razor, the specific brand of unscented soap he used, all gone. It was a surgical removal. He hadn't just packed a bag, he had systematically erased every trace of his existence from our shared life. The only thing he'd left behind was a faint indentation on his side of the bed. I sent the first frantic text, then another, then I called. It went straight to voicemail. That's when I knew this wasn't a tantrum, this was an amputation. The next few days were a blur of panic, denial, and rising anger. I called his work, his mom, his sister. No one answered. I went to his favorite coffee shop, the park where he liked to run. Nothing, he had simply vanished. I turned to my friends, the audience from that night, expecting a chorus of support. I called Amelia, sobbing, explaining that Nathan had left me over that silly letter. Her response was chillingly casual. "Oh, babe, he's just being a guy. Give him a few days to cool off. He'll come crawling back," she said, her voice distracted as if she were scrolling through emails while she spoke. But the invitation to our weekly brunch never came. When I texted the group chat asking about weekend plans, there was only silence. I tried calling another friend, Sarah, who had been there. She picked up, but her voice was strained and distant. "Listen, Jen, I'm really busy right now. Can I call you back?" She never did. It was the social equivalent of a door being quietly shut in my face. They weren't judging me, not out loud. They were just distancing themselves. The stage I had performed on was now empty, and the audience had gone home, leaving me alone under a single, harsh spotlight. The final blow came from the most unexpected source. I ran into a mutual acquaintance, a guy named Owen from Nathan's university lab at the grocery store. He looked deeply uncomfortable seeing me. I tried to act normal, asking if he'd seen Nathan. Owen shifted his weight, avoiding my eyes. "Yeah, I helped him move some of his stuff into a new place on Monday," he mumbled, staring intently at a display of avocados. Then he looked at me, a flicker of something, pity, maybe disgust, in his eyes. "He said something, Jen," Owen continued, his voice low. "He said she killed the last part of me that knew how to trust anyone." He paused. I have to go." He practically fled down the aisle, leaving me standing there with my empty shopping basket, the fluorescent lights of the supermarket suddenly feeling unbearably bright. She killed the last part of me. The words weren't an accusation, they were a diagnosis, an epitaph for what I had done.